At a gathering hosted by a friend, we playfully teased my husband about my role as the one in charge of our home, but then, what was meant to be an enjoyable, carefree evening with friends took a turn for the worse in no time at all. Honestly, I can't quite explain what overtook me. At times, I find myself swept up in the moment, yet that does not justify my words. Hello, my name is Emily, and at the age of 32, I find myself compelled to share the tale of a night when I truly stumbled. There are moments when you believe you're merely engaging in playful banter, yet you inadvertently tread upon boundaries you were unaware existed. And then comes the aftermath, a moment where the irreversible lingers, yet you carry on as if it's merely a trivial matter. That's precisely what transpired at that ridiculous gathering. The evening commenced at a friend's abode, a simple gathering infused with laughter, drinks, and the thrill of games. My husband, James, was present as well, naturally. At 35, James possesses a quiet demeanor, a trait that has defined him throughout his life. He has never been one to seek the spotlight or create a stir. He treats me well, and he's great with the kids. He toils diligently, ensuring everything operates smoothly, even when I struggle to find my footing more often than not. But what about me? I enjoy revelry, engaging in boisterous conversations, and eliciting laughter from those around me, occasionally at the expense of the unsuspecting. We had all been engaged in a lively discussion about our recent activities, and naturally, I felt compelled to mention that I was the one orchestrating everything at home. I wasn't aiming for seriousness, all right? It was merely a jest. An ill-conceived, hasty jest. Yet, it seems James had a different perspective on the matter. I chuckled, savored a sip of my wine, and remarked, "Indeed, at home, I wear the crown? Is that you, James?" He diligently attends to his work and looks after the children, while I manage all other responsibilities. I find myself engaged in a multitude of tasks. I am the true leader of the home. Silence enveloped the room for a fleeting moment, and then all eyes turned to James, anticipating his response. I believed it would elicit a chuckle. Yet, to him, it held no humor. He offered a smile, yet it bore the unmistakable mark of being contrived. The tension was palpable on his face. He remained silent at first, yet it was clear that he was far from pleased. I ought to have let it go in that moment, yet I chose not to. I continued to speak, oblivious to the potential pain my words could inflict upon him. I began to elaborate on how I was overseeing all the bills, making choices regarding the children's education, and even managing our financial matters. To be frank, I lack skill in that area. I struggle significantly when it comes to managing my finances. Yet, I continued to feign that I possessed everything in perfect order. Perhaps I was reluctant to acknowledge my impulsive nature, the way I succumbed to boredom and indulge in foolish purchases, and my tendency to neglect proper tracking of my affairs. But really, who needs to acknowledge that when you're aiming to maintain an air of nonchalance, right? At a certain moment, James interjected, and it dawned on me that perhaps I had overstepped my bounds. He remarked, "You know, Em, it seems as though you believe I contribute nothing to this place, yet it's you who spends money without a second thought. You are the one who acquires items we do not require, leaving me to tidy up the aftermath." And then it struck me. He was furious, truly infuriated. Yet, rather than offering an apology or taking responsibility for my words, I simply dismissed the matter. I jested about how he ought to be accustomed to it by now, playfully suggesting that I was merely indulging in a bit of fun, and encouraging him to take it easy. I brushed it aside, treating it as if it were nothing of consequence. I was acutely aware that my words had caused him pain. He has always been touchy about me turning him into the punchline, yet in that moment, I suppose I was indifferent. I yearned for the sound of laughter, hoping to be seen as amusing in their eyes. Yet, the moment I saw the tension etch itself onto James's face, I realized I had overstepped my bounds. The weight of our friends' gazes pressed upon me, and for a fleeting moment, I considered retreating, perhaps offering an apology. Yet, I refrained. What is the reason behind this? For the simple reason that I find it difficult to acknowledge my mistakes. I despise it. I prefer to sweep matters beneath the surface and maintain the illusion that all is well. I have existed in this state for some time now. Perhaps it's simply part of my nature, but feigning indifference feels far simpler than confronting my own errors. Following that moment, the entire atmosphere transformed. Despite attempts to divert the conversation, the palpable tension between James and me lingered in the air. Upon our arrival at home, he remained silent. He headed directly to the bedroom, and I could sense his distress. Yet, did I express my regrets? Negative. Was I truly aware of the consequences of my actions? Not quite. I told myself it was all in good fun, yet beneath the surface, I recognized the pain I had caused him. I simply found it difficult to acknowledge. What about the financial aspect? Honestly, I couldn't grasp the significance of it all. He understood that my grasp on finances wasn't flawless, yet it wasn't as if I was deliberately trying to sabotage our relationship. Perhaps I wasn't exercising complete responsibility. Perhaps I did leave him with quite a bit to tidy up. However, I had no intention of shouldering the entire burden of it. What would compel me to do that? I remained convinced of my correctness. I suppose I was merely attempting to enjoy myself, and perhaps he misinterpreted my intentions. That responsibility falls on him, doesn't it? Here I am, reflecting on the situation, acknowledging that perhaps I overstepped with James. Yet, I can't shake the feeling that it wasn't as significant as it seems. He'll move past it, as he always does, won't he? I was unprepared for the situation to deteriorate, yet inevitably, it did. I believed I could simply dismiss it and carry on, as I typically do. But no, James isn't the kind of person to simply move on as I had presumed. The following morning unfolded into chaos, and I find myself grappling with the uncertainty of how I arrived at this predicament. Yet, here we find ourselves. As dawn broke, I rose early to prepare the children for school, a routine that mirrored each day before it. Yet, there was an unmistakable shift. A chill permeated the house, an unsettling presence that transcended the typical haze of lingering slumber. Indeed, it was far more dire. It felt as though we were mere strangers. James maintained a quiet distance, and I found myself thinking, well, this is acceptable, he's merely indulging in a bit of drama. I've grown accustomed to his sulking whenever he's upset, believing it to be his method of allowing emotions to settle in their own time. I gave it little thought. As I stood there brewing coffee, he entered the kitchen and remarked, "You know, Emily, I'm weary of being the punchline. I'm weary of your behavior that suggests I don't play a role in this family." I stood still, caught in a moment of disbelief. The quality of his voice was piercing, a stark departure from the familiar cadence of James. It felt as though a long-buried tension within him had finally reached its breaking point. I yearned to utter words, to conjure some semblance of resolution, yet silence enveloped me. Instead, I remained there, coffee mug clutched in my hand, attempting to project an air of innocence as if I were oblivious to his words. I already mentioned that I was merely joking last night, so what else is there for me to do? Are you aware of the impact that had on my emotions? He inquired, his voice quivering slightly. It was evident that he was on the verge of tears, yet I had no intention of offering an apology for what I had done. I was unable to. Reluctance gripped me as I faced the unsettling possibility that perhaps, just perhaps, I had crossed a line. Thus, I resorted to my usual escape when confronted with the uncomfortable reality. I found myself becoming defensive. James, it was merely a jest. What's the reason for all this fuss? I assure you, my intentions were not meant to convey anything of that sort. I spoke, attempting to maintain a nonchalant demeanor, yet the tremor in my voice betrayed my true feelings. I loathed the feeling of being unable to master it. He remained unconvinced, however. He regarded me with a gaze that suggested he could see right through all my pretenses. Your constant teasing, always casting me in an unfavorable light before others, is beginning to take its toll on me. Emily, you seem to approach everything with a lightheartedness that borders on the frivolous. You never regard us with the seriousness we deserve. That hurt, and I was aware it ought to have. Yet, rather than acknowledging my actions, rather than grappling with the remorse for the pain I inflicted, I simply succumbed to anger. I retorted with a response I instantly wished I could take back, yet I found myself unable to hold my tongue. Perhaps if you embraced a touch more of that elusive quality, I don't know, joyfulness. Perhaps I wouldn't constantly feel the weight of the world on my shoulders, I remarked, stifling a wry chuckle. I was aware that I ought to have held my tongue, yet the impulse was simply too strong to resist. The words spilled forth, unbidden, before I could rein them in. And the expression on James's face when I uttered those words? It will forever remain etched in my memory. It was more than mere hurt, it was a seething anger. Unadulterated exasperation. Yet, I refused to yield. I attempted to mask my anger, pretending it was merely a release of pent-up frustration, yet deep down, I knew I was deceiving no one, not even my own heart. In the depths of my mind, I recognized that I was merely diverting attention, unwilling to confront the magnitude of my mistakes. I despised those moments when reality became too palpable, when I could no longer sweep it aside and feign that all was well. Thus, we lingered in quietude for the remainder of the morning. The children, naturally, were blissfully unaware of the unfolding events. Their enthusiasm for school was, in hindsight, a hidden blessing. Yet, the palpable tension lingered between James and me, even in the silence that enveloped us. What could possibly be more disheartening? I lacked the motivation to address it. I reasoned, surely he will move past this. He invariably does. It wasn't until later that afternoon, as I went to check on the bank account, that the full extent of my error dawned on me. James typically takes care of all the bills, as I must admit, managing finances isn't my strong suit. It eludes my grasp entirely. I consistently find myself investing more than necessary in trivial items, and it accumulates over time. However, upon examining the account, I discovered a significant issue. James had withdrawn every last penny from his savings. As with all things, a wave of panic washed over me completely. What on earth was happening? Did he truly just take it all? I reached for the phone without hesitation, my heart racing in my chest. Yet, he failed to answer. He always avoids the call when the atmosphere grows heavy with tension. I reached out through text, yearning for some semblance of clarity. At last, he returned my call. Yet, the tone of his voice was frigid. "I've reached my limit, Emily. You seem to approach everything with a light-hearted attitude. Neither our finances, nor myself, nor this family. I'm weary of being the one who keeps everything in place while you roam freely, unburdened by responsibility. This cannot continue." A sensation of choking gripped me. The truth of the matter struck me with sudden clarity. I had driven him to his limits, and now he was retreating from me. But what actions have I taken? I plunged into complete damage control mode, as is my custom. "James, please reconsider. I assure you, we will find a solution. I apologize. I hope you won't be upset. You are well aware of my nature. It was never my intention to cause you pain." Yet, with each plea that escaped my lips, it became increasingly clear that my efforts were in vain. He remained silent in the face of my apologies. He continued to insist that he was finished. There I stood, acutely aware that I had overstepped my bounds, yet still grappling with the weight of accountability that eluded me. I reassured myself that everything would be all right, that he would eventually see things my way. Yet, beneath the surface, I understood that this was unlike anything else. This time, I may have overstepped my bounds with him. The following days unfolded with a stillness I had never encountered within these walls. The situation was so dire that I found it impossible to meet James's gaze without that oppressive weight settling in my chest. Yet, truthfully, I remained uncertain about how to resolve it. I found myself at a loss, unsure of how to express my regret without the sensation of relinquishing all that I held dear. Perhaps I wasn't prepared to take that step. Perhaps I was indeed the one who cracked the joke, the one who made him feel diminished, yet he could have simply chosen to move on. What was it that held him back? He tends to be quite touchy regarding matters of that nature. Why couldn't he simply brush it aside with a laugh, as everyone else seemed to do? I found myself attempting to rationalize my choices internally, for the truth was, I was reluctant to confront the reality of my mistakes. Yet, circumstances continued to deteriorate. Indeed, the situation seemed to be deteriorating. He no longer spoke to me as he once did, and even in the presence of the children, it felt as though we were merely performing a routine. The children may not have grasped the situation, yet I sensed they were acutely aware of the underlying tension. Each time my gaze fell upon James, I sensed it as well. His eyes were filled with a tempest of anger, a deep well of hurt lurking beneath the surface. What could be more disheartening? I was at a loss for how to resolve it. For the whole week, I immersed myself in work, tidying up, and seeking any distraction to avoid confronting the weight of my mistakes. Yet, in the stillness of the night, when the house was enveloped in silence and all were lost in slumber, I would find myself lying there, reflecting on the conversation we had shared. I often find myself pondering whether I could have chosen different words. Might I have approached it in a more effective manner? Could it be that I actually offered an apology for once? I once found myself indifferent to matters such as this, to the question of whether I caused James any pain. I had always believed he was merely indulging in theatrics, convinced that in time he would move past it. I never imagined it would reach this point, never believed he would truly exclude me entirely. Yet, I found myself unable to utter the words of apology. To acknowledge that I was mistaken felt like an insurmountable challenge, one I simply could not face. Not at this moment. As the clock struck Friday night and the children were tucked away in their dreams, James finally found the words to reach out to me once more. In the living room, we found ourselves enveloped in an atmosphere heavy with unvoiced thoughts. I yearned to express something, anything that might illuminate my perspective for him, yet my pride loomed larger than my longing to mend the rift between us. "Emily," he began, his voice scarcely rising above a whisper. "I have reached my limit. I can no longer endure this existence. I can no longer extend you the grace of uncertainty, only to have you continue to distance yourself from me. Your lack of respect and value for me is palpable, and I can no longer maintain the facade that everything is fine when it clearly isn't." His words pierced through me, yet I resolved to mask the pain they inflicted. I was unable to. I possessed an abundance of pride that rendered such a notion impossible. In that moment, rather than offering an apology, I uttered the only words that came to mind. "James, I never intended for things to escalate to this point, yet I refuse to remain passive and pretend that I am solely responsible for the chaos that has unfolded. You are the one who withdrew all the funds from the account. You are the one who is closing me off. It was a low blow, I confess, yet I found myself unable to resist. I found myself in a position where I needed to stand my ground. I refused to allow him to cast me as the antagonist in this narrative. It seems you might not fully grasp the situation, do you?" he inquired, his voice quavering. I had been striving to maintain my composure for what felt like an eternity, Emily. I had been shouldering it all, while you continued to take and take, offering nothing in return. I have reached my limit. I'm at my limit with this. And that was the moment it struck me. He bore a solemn demeanor. This time, forgiveness was not on the table for him. No longer would there be a facade that all was well. I felt him slipping away, and I was at a loss for how to hold on. The remainder of the evening faded into a haze. Silence enveloped us in the moments that followed. Silence enveloped the moment, leaving no words to be spoken. I remained in the living room as he withdrew to the bedroom. It felt as though we were inhabiting distinct worlds within the same walls, and I could no longer turn a blind eye to it. The following morning, James had vanished. He departed without so much as a whisper to rouse me from my slumber. As I emerged from the cocoon of my sheets, a note awaited me on the kitchen counter. "I'm heading to my mother's with the children. I require some distance. We shall converse at a later time." And that was the moment when everything truly settled into place. I had driven him beyond his limits. I had crossed a line this time. Though I felt unprepared to confront it, I found myself with no alternative. I settled onto the couch, a sense of loss washing over me, as if all that I had strived for, all that I had once held dear, was eluding my grasp. Yet, did I truly embrace accountability? Did I genuinely take responsibility for my actions? Negative. I found myself seated in a state of self-pity, pondering the duration of James's absence and the time it would take for him to return and mend the situation. I was powerless to resist. I found myself reluctant to acknowledge my blunder. It was in that moment of realization that the weight of my losses crashed down upon me. My family, my home, all that I held dear seemed to slip away, and I found myself unprepared for such a harsh truth. My mind wasn't even on the idea of mending things for him. I found myself reflecting on its impact on me. James lingered at his mother's abode for a span of 2 days, 2 entire days enveloped in silence, devoid of calls, texts, or any form of communication. And despite the awareness that I ought to have reached out, to extend an apology, I chose not to. Instead, I found myself lost in the endless scroll of my phone, seeking refuge from the harsh truths of the moment. Upon his return, he remained notably silent. He seemed remote, more frigid than he had ever been. Truthfully, I found myself at a loss for how to resolve it. I found myself at a loss, unsure of how to mend the situation. Yet, did I truly make an effort? Negative. I found myself sitting there, anticipating his return to set things right, as he always did. The days following James's return unfolded in a haze of half-hearted efforts to mend what had been broken. I resolved to put in more effort, yet truthfully, I found myself questioning whether I truly understood the way forward. I anticipated that he would effortlessly forgive me and restore our relationship to its former state, as if nothing had transpired. However, that did not come to pass. It didn't unfold in that manner. I would reassure myself that improvements were on the horizon, that we were managing just fine. Yet, beneath the surface, I was acutely aware that I had not truly transformed. I found myself devoid of any newfound knowledge. Pride held me captive, preventing me from acknowledging my mistakes. Indeed, I offered an apology in a fleeting moment, yet it lacked sincerity. I yearned for a return to the familiar, all the while avoiding the weight of my own actions that caused him pain. Despite my awareness that I had driven him to the brink, I found myself unable to cease my relentless accusations, holding him responsible for every misstep that unfolded. As the weeks slipped away, the chill lingered, unyielding and persistent. The silence that enveloped us became increasingly intolerable. Our exchanges felt shallow, as if we were merely cohabiting rather than truly connected as a couple. We would engage in conversations about the children, the home, and other trivial matters. Yet, the essence of what truly mattered lingered in the silence, unspoken and untouched. And I allowed it to unfold. I lay awake through countless nights, pondering when life would return to its former state. I found it difficult to grasp the depth of his pain, the reason he couldn't simply let go and move forward. Yet, I found myself unprepared to confront the reality. I had ruined something beyond repair, and perhaps the moment to mend it had slipped away. Perhaps I had overstepped my bounds with him. Perhaps it was my humor, my sense of pride, my unwillingness to accept responsibility, that ultimately became the breaking point. Yet, the humor had ceased to be the focal point. It was a reflection of how I had treated him, gradually, over the passage of time. I underestimated him, believing I could act freely without regard for the repercussions that would inevitably follow. James ultimately gathered his belongings and departed for good. There was no intense clash. No final argument. There he was, stepping out the door, the children in tow, leaving me behind in the home we had crafted together. And thus, it came to a close. He had vanished. It's a difficult truth to confront, yet I find myself acknowledging that I have not truly grasped the lesson at hand. I find myself enveloped in self-pity, overshadowing any sympathy I might hold for him. Perhaps one day I will come to understand the complete ramifications of the harm I have inflicted. Yet here I remain, attempting to assemble the fragments of my existence, pondering whether I will ever manage to mend the chaos I have created. Yet, beneath the surface, I am aware that I cannot. The moment has passed for that now. Perhaps this is for the greater good. It eludes my comprehension how I arrived at this juncture, yet I have reconciled with the reality that I am the architect of my own fate. It was not him, I was the one. Perhaps that is the most challenging aspect to come to terms with.